Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Decoding the Unknown. As always, I'm your decoder, Simon. Welcome. I'm here. One of my writers, in this case Hills, has written me a script all about the Library of Alexandria. This is a famous one. I'm kind of surprised we haven't covered this yet. Is that the one that got burned down? I'm sure I'm wrong, but did Alexander the Great burn this down or something like that? My centuries are probably even wrong, but that's what I vaguely remember. I feel like I should know more about this. Maybe you should also know more about this. Well, welcome to this episode. We're going to decode the fact from the fiction about this one. Let's jump in. The Great Library of Alexandria conjures images of a grand building rising proudly above the hustle and bustle of the dusty streets of Alexandria. A vault housing the vast stores of ancient knowledge, the pinnacle of human innovation, and a monument to everything the ancient world achieved. A complex built for the sole purpose of learning and innovation. The great inventions spilled out of the library, transforming Alexandria itself, creating an inspiring city filled with wonders. Is this true? Is this the bit that's... Is this what everyone thinks? Because I have to say... Also, I just thought it was a library. I just imagine there's some tablets in there. Not like tablets like this, like clay tablets. Everyone knows what I'm talking about. I don't know why I need to. It's not going to be filled with iPads, is it, Simon? Use your big brain. The great minds working at Alexandria weren't limited by funding or prejudice, and it showed. Mechanical birds sang and whistled in the trees. Really? What's wrong with regular birds? There's going to be birds. Just let the birds whistle. No one needs the non-whistling birds. This isn't that... What's that TV show with the crickets? And they're not real, they're just these little speakers in the bush. Is it Wayward Pines? Is that what it is? I don't remember anything about that show, other than there's little speakers in the bushes, making the sound of crickets. We don't need that, we've got regular birds. The birds are still in existence. They were operated by running water. Okay. Compressed air made statues blow trumpets and shoot arrows. Now that, I have to say, pretty sick. Temple doors would open and close automatically, controlled by the lighting and extinguishing of fires, and the city's central avenue was lit by street lamps burning olive oil, brightening the night sky. Everyone was welcome to visit the library, to absorb the knowledge and learn from the wise men and women who taught in the gardens and the lecture halls. And then it all ended, going up in smoke, setting humanity back thousands of years. The Library of Alexandria is one of those stories we all accept as fact, but there's actually a lot about the library that we simply don't know. There are as many theories and fanciful tales as there were books stacked on the shelves of the Great Library. But what is fact and what is fiction? I have to say, I didn't have such an overblown opinion of the Library of Alexandria to begin with. I just thought it was a regular-ass library, and that when it burned down, we didn't get set back thousands of years. We just lost a bunch of history, and so then we had to just guess, or have archaeologists dig up some old bones or pots or something like that and figure it out. I don't think we were set back thousands of years. That seems a little bit unrealistic. Today's video is absolutely brought to you by one of my favorite sponsors, and that is Vessi. Vessi make incredible shoes. These are the Stormburst low tops, which are absolutely perfect for summer. They are waterproof shoes, so if there's some unexpected rain, you're absolutely covered. And also, you might think, oh, waterproof. That sounds like in summer, my feet are going to get really sweaty, Simon. Well, good news, they're not, because of the magic of Dymatex. That is the material that keeps these waterproof, not water resistant. You can go all the way up into a puddle until right at the top here. Only water's going to get in over the top. It's completely waterproof. It's quite amazing. Comes off like water off a duck's back, and basically no sweat at all. Vessi started sponsoring me a couple of years ago. I've basically worn nothing except for Vessis for the last 2 years. Winter, spring, summer, autumn, all year round, I'm wearing them. Plus, they also have this westerly jacket, a new acquisition of mine. It's stylish, it's comfortable, perfect for spring, all those cooler summer evenings, and of course, because it's Vessi, it is 100% waterproof. Doesn't look like a waterproof jacket, but it is. It's fantastic. So you can grab a pair of Stormburst low tops at vessi.com/DTU and get 15% off your first purchase at checkout. Stay dry, stay comfy with Vessi. Thank you to them for sponsoring, and now back to it. The Great Library of Alexandria. In 334 BC, a young man, known as one Alexander the Great, went on a world tour, and around 2 years later, he arrived in Egypt, promptly conquered it, and founded a city, Alexandria. Oh, okay, so wait, did Alexander the Great start the library, not burn it down? Okay, my bad. Got that completely wrong. But at least Alexander the Great is in this story. At least there's that. He soon left to continue his conquering ways and never returned to the city that bore his name. Oh yeah, Alexandria, Alexander the Great, there you go. Oh, did he feminize it? Alexandria, isn't that like a girl's name? Upon his untimely death, his empire was divided among his generals, with Ptolemy I becoming the ruler of Egypt and choosing Alexandria as capital. Under the Ptolemaic rulers, fondly known as the Ptolemies, okay? It's very confusing because Ptolemy has a silent P. Why?
Huh? Why not?
Thanks for making my life difficult, ancient Egyptian. Don't know. This is after ancient Egypt. This is well after ancient Egypt. Why did I say ancient Egypt? That sounds so dumb. That was so long, much before this. Alexandria became one of the greatest and most prosperous cities of the Hellenistic world. It was a thriving seaport, a commercial hub, and a center of learning and culture. For you see, Alexandria was home to a great library. Or, well, so most of us believe. One of the many things we don't know about the library is who founded it. Alexander was a student of none other than the great Aristotle. Later in life, the two had a falling out and never spoke again, but Aristotle instilled in the young ruler a respect for scholarship and knowledge. So, the more romantic theory is that Alexander envisioned the city of Alexandria and its future library based on Aristotle's Lyceum as a pinnacle of Greek culture and learning. Wait, didn't he fall out with him? It'd be a bit weird to be like, yeah, no, this guy who I don't really like anymore, I built this big-ass library for him. That'd be a bit weird, wouldn't it?
Maybe.
However, he died before the city and the library was built, so his general and the former ruler of Egypt, Ptolemy I, took the idea and ran with it, turning Alexandria into a center for Greek arts with the help of Demetrius of Phalerum, a brilliant politician and scholar who found himself in exile. If this was the case, it seems that good old Alexander made a note of this grand vision of his, so it's equally plausible that the library was founded by Ptolemy I or his son Ptolemy II. Creative. We figure the library was probably founded soon after the city and was most likely completed under Ptolemy II, who ruled from 284 BCE to 246 BCE, but that's just all guesswork. The truth of the matter is that there's no record of anyone building a great library. However, in the Berchion, or the royal quarter of the city, a temple was built, the Mosion, or seat of the Muses, dedicated to the 9 Greek goddesses of the arts. It functions much like a university today, a center of learning where the great minds of the Hellenistic world could gather, swap ideas, and criticize each other's work. The library, which is never referred to as the Great Library of Alexandria, but rather the Alexandrian Library, was probably attached to the Mosion and reserved for use by the scholars who came to study, learn, and teach at this great temple of knowledge. During this time, it was common practice for temples and shrines to have their own libraries, so it wouldn't have been unprecedented. The men of letters, these were the early days before they started hunting down the knights of hell, had a good life. They were given free lodgings and meals, as well as a generous allowance and some tax exemptions. The head librarian, or director of this great institute, was a priest and a scholar, since it was a religious affair after all, and he was appointed by the king. According to legend, the Mosion and its library was considered one of the largest in the world, and the Ptolemies, eager to build its prestige, were generous with their funding. The goal of the library was to collect all the works in the known world under one roof. To achieve this, agents were sent to the great book markets of Athens and Rhodes to buy books. Ships docking in the port were expected to hand over any books on board. Welcome to Alexandria! We'll have all your books, please. The ships were also routinely searched, and any books found were confiscated. These books were then copied, and the copies were returned to the owners while the originals were placed in the library. So many books were added to the collection this way that they had a designation of their own, from the ships. Ptolemy III sent emissaries to the kings and leaders of the known world, asking to borrow their books to copy for his great library. These Ptolemy guys, they're like the OG data hoarders. From the Athenians, he borrowed master copies of the works of Aeschylus, Euripides, and Sophocles, leaving a deposit of 15 talents. However, after copying the books, he sent the copies back to Athens and kept the originals for his library. He lost his deposit, but that was 15 talents well spent. Yeah, a deposit is basically a cost if you want to keep something. The library don't do that. It's not fair, but you know, kind of is. The library grew, at least 2, possibly 3 annexes or daughter libraries, and they were added to accommodate the great collection. One of these daughter libraries could be found at the Serapeum, a temple to the god Serapis. We have no idea how many books were kept in the library, and when we say books, we mean scrolls, since books as we know them hadn't been invented yet. According to a letter, which we'll get back to, when asked by the king, Demetrius claimed that the collection already contained 200,000 books, but he was still endeavoring to find more to reach his goal of 500,000. It seems old Demetrius might have been the first bibliophile in recorded history. Demetrius, bibliophile / OG data hoarder. Other estimates vary wildly from 40,000 scrolls to 700,000 scrolls. Yeah, and bear in mind, like when they say copy, it's not like they're taking it down to like Kinko's. They're opening that scroll. There's some dude sitting there with like a quill or something and like writing it out word by word because they didn't have the press yet, the printing press. Or books. They just had scrolls. However, none of the sources giving us these estimates ever visited the library themselves. By the time the likes of Seneca the Younger started lamenting the loss of the invaluable collection, the library was long gone, which is not surprising. With all those flammable papyrus scrolls, the Library of Alexandria was a health and safety disaster waiting to happen and an OCD librarian's worst nightmare. No contemporary description of the library when it was built remains today. It might have been inside the Motion, or it could have been a separate building. The only description we have comes from Strabo, who visited Alexandria in 24 BCE, well after the library's heyday. From his description of the Motion, we know it formed part of the palaces, had a colonnaded walkway, a room with seats, a communal dining hall where all the learned men took their meals. Bro, he's gone to a library that allegedly has 200,000 books in it or scrolls in it. He's like, oh yeah, they got a dining room. If there was a really impressive library, wouldn't he be inclined to mention the library? No? While he doesn't specifically mention a library, yes, from his writings, we know that he had access to a book collection, but whether it was the Great Library or the remnants of a much diminished library, we simply don't know. He's like, oh no, it's a collection of books that the dudes read during lunch. Just like a single shelf with a few trashy novels on it. Great library or not, we know there were some libraries in Alexandria, and the Motion of ancient Alexandria drew some of the great minds of the time. So odds are that there were most likely book collections of considerable value in the city, which brings us to the first big mystery. What happened to the Alexandrian library? Do we know that it existed? Do we know that it was for sure there? No one seems to have seen it. I guess this Ptolemy thing and the scrolls, there's quite a bit of evidence. Or talk of it. Okay, fine. It existed. The destruction of the Great Library. For a long time, the blame for the destruction of the Great Library of Alexandria fell on Julius Caesar. Oh, that's right, not Alexander the Great. One of the other historical people that, people still remember. In 48 BCE, Caesar was hot on the trail of his one-time ally turned rival, Pompey. He finally caught up with Pompey in the city of Alexandria. However, in his eagerness to be reunited with his rival, he arrived in the city well before the bulk of his army and walked right into the middle of a civil war between Cleopatra and her younger brother Ptolemy XIII for control of Egypt. Caesar soon found himself allied with the future queen and the last Ptolemaic ruler, Cleopatra. When the Egyptian forces under Ptolemy III attacked the harbour trying to seize the ships, Caesar, realizing he would be left high and dry with no chance of supplies or reinforcement if he took control of the docks, set the ships on fire. Unlike many of Caesar's other military endeavours, this attack wasn't particularly well documented. It appears that the ships, all made of wood and conveniently tied up together, soon, with the help of the ocean breeze and because things just weren't going his way, the flames spread to the city. Depending on your source and how much the writer disliked Caesar, the fire was either limited only to buildings right on the docks or it spread into the city and destroyed the Great Library. Oh, so could the Caesar destroying it thing just be propaganda because some historian writing about it is like, yeah, Caesar was a dick. Yeah, he destroyed that Great Library, sure, why not? Yeah, him. Historians of the past. Nothing like letting bias into all of your works. It's only 100 years after this attack that the first mention of a loss of books was made by Seneca the Younger, who accused Caesar of destroying at least 40,000 books during the attack. A later source claimed that Caesar burned 400,000 books and destroyed that marvelous monument of the literary activity of our ancestors. Eventually, he was accused of burning 700,000 books when the city of Alexandria was sacked by the dictator Caesar's army. It seems Caesar's popularity waned somewhat in the years after his death. Yeah. It's not hugely surprising. By the time Caesar came along, the library was probably already in decline. It's plausible that a part of the library's collection, marked for export, was stored in a warehouse close to the docks, and it's this collection that Caesar burned. However, it's highly unlikely that Caesar destroyed the Library of Alexandria single-handedly. Strabo, who wrote 20 years after this supposed flaming disaster, doesn't mention any fire damage. Mark Antony, according to legend, gifted Cleopatra 200,000 books from the library at Pergamum to add to the collection at Alexandria. This didn't go down too well in Rome. The Emperor Claudius, who ruled 60 years after Caesar, added a new extension to the old Motion at Alexandria and named it after himself. Of course. Emperor Domitian sent scribes to the library to recover and copy some texts that had been lost to a fire, and Emperor Hadrian visited the Motion in Alexandria in 130 CE. Apparently, He had a lot of questions for the teachers, though it's unclear how many of those questions were related to construction. It seems that Caesar, at least, is off the hook. However, he wasn't the only Roman emperor to burn down Alexandria. Over the many years of Roman dominance, the city of Alexandria was repeatedly attacked by a succession of Roman emperors and their various enemies, and that list is long, for Rome had many enemies. In 215 CE, Emperor Caracalla punished Alexandria for mocking him by massacring its young men and plundering the city. Yo, Caracalla, you ugly. And he's like, I shall have my revenge. And he just murders all of the young men in an entire city. Sensitive much? Caracalla.
I'm sensitive, yet dangerous.
In 270 CE, the Palmyrene Empire under Queen Zenobia captured the city of Alexandria. By 272 CE, the forces of Emperor Aurelian, in an attempt to reclaim the city, destroyed the entire Berchion Quarter where the library was located, and it's unlikely that the library survived this battle. It was probably utterly destroyed along with everything around it. However, if by some miracle something did survive, it was probably destroyed in 297 CE when Emperor Diocletian sacked the city of Alexandria, destroying the Berchion Quarter yet again. The destruction of the library could be placed on any of these emperors, or a dozen others, or none of them. None of the accounts of these many battles mention the destruction of a library. It's possible also all of them. Like, over time, it just got more and more ruined, just kind of decayed. People stopped caring about it, and that's why they didn't write it down, because it just wasn't important to them. Another favorite theory blames an overzealous Christian mob burning down a beacon of rational thought, science, and philosophy. In 391, Emperor Theodosius, a devout Christian, issued a decree sanctioning the demolition of temples in Alexandria. The streets of Alexandria had turned into a battleground between the upstart sect known as Christianity and those clinging to the old faiths. That upstart sect did rather well, didn't it, in the end? However, the Serapeum, which once served as an annex to the Great Library, was still standing. For many weeks, the Christians and the pagans had been at each other's throats. Pro-Christian writers blamed the pagans, while anti-Christian writers blamed the Christians. As is often the case, though, I suspect both sides were equally guilty of atrocities against the other, and it had nothing to do with preserving monuments or learning and rational thought, and everything to do with religious intolerance. The pagans had occupied the Serapeum, yet after yet another bout of violence. Emperor Theodosius, probably tired of dealing with the riots, ruled that the pagan militants be pardoned, but the temple be demolished. Apparently, the Bishop of Alexandria, Theophilus, led an attack on Serapeum, giving the first blow to the statue at Serapis. After plundering the temple and destroying it, Theophilus ordered a church to be built on its site. Classy. Yeah, it's just because f*** you, right? There are 5 different accounts of the destruction of the Serapeum, and none of these mention a library. No one's mentioning this library. That previous dude was more talking about where they ate lunch than this supposed amazing library. A Roman historian writing before the destruction of the Serapeum already refers to the scrolls and books once kept there in the past tense, suggesting that the collection once held there had gone. By this time, Rome had converted to Christianity, so the emperors were no longer funding pagan temples. Without funding, it would have been a near impossible task to maintain a library. But, like the Roman emperors, they were probably not responsible for the destruction of the Library of Alexandria. So, with no one left to blame, attention turned to the Arabs who invaded Alexandria in 642 CE. According to this story, after conquering the great city, an Arab general, Amr ibn al-As, impressed with the vast collection of books in the library, asked the Caliph Amr what he should do with all the books. Apparently, the Caliph replied that if the content of the book was in accordance with the Book of Allah, it was superfluous, since the Book of Allah will suffice. If it was not in accordance with the Book of Allah, there was no need to preserve it. Dude, just say burn the books, my dude. Just be like, burn those heretical books now. Also, this guy's like pretty close-minded. He never read another book. He's like, no, I don't even like fiction because it's either in the Book of Allah or it's not. And if it's not good. And if it is, it's already in there. Duh. No one points out this flaw in his logic because he's what was he? The Caliph. I assume that's important. So all of the books were sent to Alexandria's bathhouses to use as fuel. Apparently it took around 6 months to burn the whole collection. Now this story only shows up around 600 years later in the 13th century, and it has been discredited by historians. Yeah, it does It sounds so ridiculous, it just sounds like propaganda. Just total propaganda. I'm inclined to believe that it's just nonsense. By the time the Arabs arrived in Alexandria, the library was already a bit of a myth. However, there were probably other libraries in the city, so it's possible that the invading army destroyed those, intentionally or accidentally, and a Christian bishop with an axe to grind embellished the story 600 years later. I think if you're writing 600 years later and there's no contemporary reports of this, you can just widely ignore it. We've tried to blame the Romans, the Christians, and the Muslims so far, with no luck. So what happened to the Great Library? The most likely answer is also the most boring: time. Under the early Ptolemies, the library was well funded and well managed. It was considered a jewel in the crown of Egypt, and no expense was spared. However, as time progressed, politics and ideas changed, and under the later Ptolemies and eventually Rome, funding became unreliable. The library may once have been considered the most important in the world, but later rulers had little time for libraries, especially libraries that contained texts contradicting the popular religious and political ideas of the time. The golden age of the library probably came to an end when Ptolemy VIII expelled several scholars, among them the chief librarian, from the city for supporting his political rival. In a fit of pique, he also expelled all foreign scholars. Suddenly unemployed and homeless, these scholars left for other cities, with schools like Athens and Rhodes taking their knowledge, influence, and prestige with them. Wow, it's like the ancient equivalent of a brain drain, where people just leave somewhere because there's better opportunities elsewhere, and everyone left behind is just less upwardly mobile. Initially, the directors of the Museion were also scholars known for their intellect and knowledge. However, as interest in the library began to fade, the role was given to court favourites and political allies. It's going to be great for its continuance. It became a reward for flunkies with little interest in intellectual pursuits rather than the position held by serious scholars. A combination of mismanagement, neglect, and unreliable funding would have been disastrous for the library. The humidity of Alexandria and the wear and tear of being handled would have led to the scrolls deteriorating quickly. Without computers or a printing press, the only way to preserve a document was to copy it by hand. A time-consuming process. Jeez, can you imagine every book you buy has been written out by someone by hand? Books would be mad expensive. To do that, you need papyrus, ink, and scribes, and for that, you need money. When the codex arrived, books as we know them today, every single scroll had to be hand-copied into a book. This process meant that only texts considered to be valuable would have been saved. Minor texts that didn't make it into a codex before deteriorating to the point where they were no longer legible or weren't considered worth copying were lost. When the Roman Empire finally took control of Alexandria, the importance of the once great library would have been greatly diminished. As the library lost influence, many of its collections were sold, and the buildings were finally razed or converted into other facilities, such as churches or mosques. The Romans also built a great many libraries of their own, probably stocking these new libraries with scrolls from the Library of Alexandria. Libraries closer to the scholars' homes meant they no longer needed to travel all the way to Alexandria to continue their work, so in a twist of irony, the building and expansion of the library network in Rome was probably helped the Library of Alexandria to its eventual demise. Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, if it's easier to access, people are going to do it. It's like why people shop on Amazon instead of going to the high street. What did we lose? The Library of Alexandria held the accumulated knowledge of the ancient world. Whether by fire, mobs, or just the passage of time, the wealth of information lost when the library disappeared set human development back thousands of years. One article even claimed that had it not been for the loss of the Library of Alexandria, Columbus wouldn't have set sail for the New World. Oh no, he would have traveled to the moon. No. No. It definitely would have been Columbus. Look, that's not the butterfly effect. Come on. It's not like Columbus is going to be into a parallel universe where the Library of Alexandria wasn't destroyed and he becomes an astronaut. No. Knowing his navigational skills, he would have probably ended up on Mars and just called it the moon. So, what amazing information could be found within this bastion of knowledge that would have led to Columbus colonizing the moon? Well, let's start with some of the more outlandish theories. After all, we're trying to send Columbus to the moon here. Apparently, the Library of Alexandria contained information about, wait for it, aliens. Oh, it wouldn't be a decade in the unknown about the ancient world without aliens coming up, would it? Would it, everybody? Oh, Jesus. Yes, the Great Library could have told us once and for all the truth about extraterrestrial life and their visits to our lovely planet. The powerful elites, you know who you are, destroyed the library, and with it all records of alien contact and UFO sightings in antiquity, because they don't want us to know the truth. I reckon E.T. could most certainly have helped Columbus get to some form of planetary body, but I'm a little skeptical, so let's get a little more serious. Another favourite theory is that the library contained records of even more ancient civilizations like the Minoan Empire, the Hittites, the Nabateans, and the Babylonians, as well as records of diplomatic correspondence between Egypt and Atlantis. The library also contained the Sumerian king list, dictionaries for Linear A, and records to answer questions that have been puzzling archaeologists for decades. Who built Göbekli Tepe? And who were the mysterious sea people? Atlantis is fiction, so definitely no diplomatic records, but the rest isn't entirely unreasonable for those of us who haven't made an in-depth study of history. However, sadly, the Hellenistic-era Greek scholars knew very little about the Minoan civilization and the Bronze Age in general, and even less about the preceding ages, and as far as we know, the ancient Egyptians forgot to mention the invasion of the Sea Peoples to their Greek overlords. Thus, we can safely assume no Atlantean technologies or science from ancient civilizations, which for some reason we have not been able to come up with ourselves in the last 2,000 years, had been lost when the library disappeared. Yeah, it's like, oh, come on. All this stuff's just so silly. What about the Bible? Ooh, Bible getting in there as well. Okay. Surely a library as great as the Library of Alexandria had the first copies of the Bible, writings about the rise of Christianity, Rome's conversion to Christianity, records of the Great Flood, or stories upon which the story of Noah's Ark was based, records of the time Jesus spent in Egypt, evidence of the Israelite migrations out of Egypt, or records of the 10 plagues, that sort of thing. However, the ancient Greeks who built the library had very little interest in Christianity. It was just another somewhat strange upstart cult among a sea of other cults and beliefs, and nothing more. By the time Christianity became a serious religion and the Roman Empire started converting, the library no longer existed. Many of the stories in the Bible are also parables and myths rather than historical events. You think? I know people think the Bible is literally true, which is just bizarre, and therefore wouldn't have been found in the Library of Alexandria. However, the library wasn't entirely devoid of Jewish writings. The city of Alexandria had a large Jewish community, so the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible translated from the biblical Hebrew into Koine Greek, were most likely done at the Library of Alexandria. At the time, few people could read or even speak biblical Hebrew, so Greek was a more accessible choice. So far, there's nothing about aliens, Atlantis, the Great Flood, or the life of Jesus in the library. So just what the heck was in this grand temple to the Muses? Well, thanks to the work of Callimachus of Cyrene, we have some idea. Callimachus was the man responsible for developing the first library catalogue system called the Pinarches, or the Tables, which we still use today. Don't we use it? Wait, I remember when I was a kid, you go to the library and there's drawers and there'd be full of little cards about books. But nowadays, don't you just go to a computer terminal and be like, yo, I want this book? And it'll be like, yes, it's floor 3, aisle 7, shelf 2, or whatever. And you just go there and there's the book. Scrolls were divided into categories based on topic and then listed alphabetically by author. Oh, okay. Wait, that seems so obvious. That you divide them by topic. What did we do before? Just shove them all in a big room. Like there's to the right of me, there's a big bookshelf. If you're wondering where I am, I'm recording at home because there's construction work going on in my office. That's why the set is different. And I'm doing the what was it called? Callimachus system. What was the system? Tables? Because I just got on my books and I shoved them on shelves, not in any order at all. It's very disorganized. And each scroll was tagged with the title, the author, the subject, and estimated number of lines per work. The system wasn't perfect, but without it, the library and all the knowledge stored within would have been unusable. My bookshelf's usable, you just gotta look for a while. Many articles and websites claim that the library was intended to be a universal library containing books and knowledge from all nations. This may have been the case, but since we have no original contemporary accounts about this library, there's simply no way to know for sure. However, we do know that the library was built in the early Hellenistic period by Greeks to serve the needs of Greek scholars, so the collection mainly focused on Greek literary work, and the fragments of the Pinarches, that's the tables that survived, support this theory. Alexandria was a Greek city, but it was in Egypt, so it's very likely that the library would also have had a substantial collection of Egyptian books and records on kings that ruled before Alexander came along. The building of the pyramids, details about explorations around Egypt and the interior of Africa, and information about Egyptian people and their beliefs. There's some writing to suggest that books from a few other cultures were included, such as a history of Babylonia written in Greek by a Chaldean priest and a sizable book on Zoroastrianism written by a pupil of Callimachus. Buddhist writings might have also been available to scholars at the library, and perhaps a small collection of works from other nations like India. However, works from other cultures and written in other languages would have been translated into Greek, and we have no idea if anyone would have seen any value in keeping the original, since it would have been a language not everyone could read. Besides, they had a Greek version, so why take up precious space with a document no one is going to look at again? Researching this topic, I've also come across a list of celebrity men and women of letters who apparently all studied at the Greek Library of Alexandria and possibly added to its substantial collection Archimedes, Eratosthenes, Euclid, Herophilos, and even Hypatia. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing those last two correctly. However, as with everything about the library, this is just a theory. We know very little about the life of Archimedes. What we do know about his life suggests that he spent time in Syracuse, but there's nothing that specifically links him to Alexandria. Euclid, Herophilos, and Dionysius of Thrace may have all studied there, depending on when exactly the library was founded, but since we don't know that, we don't know for sure. As for Hypatia, as a fascinating figure as she is, I have no idea who she is. But she's fascinating. By the time she was born, the library had ceased to exist, so she definitely didn't work there and was most certainly not the last librarian of the Great Library. One scholar who we know lived and worked in Alexandria and could probably be found wandering the halls of the Museion was Eratosthenes, who theorized that the world was in fact a sphere in a time when most people thought that the world was flat. He even calculated the circumference and diameter of the Earth, and considering that he was working without computers and a very limited understanding of science and mathematics, he came pretty close. He also came to the conclusion that the oceans were all connected, and was the first man in history to suggest that it might be possible to circumnavigate the globe. Everyone else is thinking it's flat, and he's like, boys, it's a sphere. We could sail all the way around. So while we're not sure about Archimedes, and we don't have a yearbook with a silly star photo, some of the great thinkers of the time studied at the Museion, and they would most certainly have added their own writings to the library's collection. There also seems to be this idea that the Library of Alexandria was not just a center for learning, but a center for scientific research and development. However, to the Greeks of the Hellenistic era, science meant something a little different. Scholars were far more interested in what we would call the humanities than the hard sciences. Many of the head librarians' fields of study were philosophy, grammar, poetry, textual analysis. The scholars at the library would have spent months comparing various copies of the Iliad and the Odyssey, carefully analysing and pondering every little difference, and studying the works of Athenian playwrights and great philosophers. Most scholars would have been polymaths, so they probably dabbled in other fields like mathematics and natural philosophy. However, the scholars and philosophers studying and teaching at the Museion and similar complexes around the known world were either rich themselves or they had rich patrons. They never had to do any physical labour, and therefore didn't have the interest or the incentive to invent anything. That was left to the working class and slaves. The sciences studied at the Museion were based in logic, induction, and common sense, in an attempt to explain the physical and natural world. The scientific method had not yet been formulated, and the closest these great minds ever came to experimentation was thought experiments. The fields of astronomy and geometry might have contained a little more observation and measurement, but it still wasn't anything like science as we know it today. If they were anything like most academics I know, they mostly sat around arguing about abstract concepts that few people care about while drinking gin and tonics and munching snacks. I'm in the wrong field. I should just be munching snacks and having gin and tonics. Should have got into this. Oh, I'm just kidding. I don't really have to work for a living. This isn't really work. Just sit here and read something interesting about the Library of Alexandria. I could drink a gin and tonic if I wanted to. It's a little bit early, but I could if I wanted to. There were exceptions, of course. The work done by Archimedes in the fields of geometry had some practical applications, and Hero, or Heron, of Alexandria, who may or may not have worked at the library, is considered one of the fathers of physics for his multitude of inventions, including the first vending machines, and the aeolipar, a sphere placed in perpetual motion through the use of pressurized steam. Today it's considered to be the very first and very primitive steam engine, an invention that would later power the Industrial Revolution. However, most of these inventions were considered toys and curiosities. It's doubtful that Heron ever thought his inventions would send human development hurtling forward. As for the other ancient discoveries like batteries or crude flying machines, sorry to disappoint, nothing like that ever graced the ancient shelves. So it's unlikely that mankind was set back centuries or even decades in terms of technological and scientific progress. The scholars at the Great Library were far more interested in the various different variants of Homer's Iliad than they were in advancing medicine or sending anyone to the moon. It's kind of disappointing, isn't it? Doesn't that seem like it's the past. People getting sick and dying all the time, and they're like, yeah, but dude, have you read page 4 of the Iliad? Dude, the subtext.
Ooh!
While the Museon and the library is seen as a beacon of enlightened thought, there are some rumors that the library had a dark side. Oh, shit. Throughout history, prisoners have often been used for medical experiments, and it's possible that the same happened in Alexandria. The study of medicine and human anatomy was still in its infancy, and considering the interest of the great scholars up on the hill in their library, research on medicine was probably historical and philosophical in nature. However, there were at least 2 anatomists living and working in Alexandria who made some groundbreaking discoveries. Herophilus discovered the nervous system and the distinction between different types of nerves, and Erasistratus mapped the blood vascular system. No amount of logical reasoning and discussing abstract thoughts would have allowed them to do this. For this kind of work, you need an actual human body. Oh god, they're subjects of the bodies of prisoners, as well as condemned prisoners provided to them by the kings, Ptolemy II and Ptolemy III. Apparently, even ancient commenters considered their investigations to be cruel to the extreme. Oh my lord, these dudes are just like cutting them open to see how their blood works. It's kind of up, dudes. And they were heavily criticized for use of vivisection on living prisoners. While they were working in Alexandria under the patronage of the king, there's no proof that they were associated with the Museon or the library specifically. However, the library was a center of learning. It did have a medical section, though it was very limited, and ethics regarding medical research and human testing were a little different back then. So it's possible that their works could be found on the catalogue. I mean, dude, if your medical research involves someone screaming in pain because you're cutting them open to examine their blood, maybe be like, is this ethical? Is this something we should be doing? Sometimes the quest for knowledge can go down some dark roads, and it's plausible that not even the Great Library of Alexandria is exempt from this. After that dark detour, let's get back to Columbus and his trip to the new moon. We've determined that there probably wasn't any grand technologies that could have helped Columbus reach the moon, but we still lost a lot of knowledge when the library ceased to exist, right? The Library of Alexandria was the largest and the most famous, but it was hardly unique. It even had a rival, the Library of Pergamon. There's one story that claims the king banned the export of papyrus to the city of Pergamon to stifle the library, and so to preserve the prestige of the Library of Alexandria. On top of that, owning books was a sign of wealth, so the book markets were thriving, and many a rich man had his own private library. Scribes commissioned by scholars and the wealthy visited the library to make copies of books for their patrons, and copies made of books were sent to other libraries. Books taken from the ships were copied, and the copies were returned to their owners. While the library probably contained a number of unique scrolls, most of the scrolls and the knowledge they contained were widely available. Imagine losing one of the world's biggest libraries, like the British Library or the Library of Congress, to a fire. The financial and cultural loss of original documents would be immense, but airplanes are not going to start falling out of the sky simply because the books containing the information on how they work went up in flames. The knowledge is still there in the minds of everyone who has ever studied aeronautical engineering. Of course, the number of people who had access to the books in the Library of Alexandria is probably quite a bit smaller than the number of people who studied aeronautical engineering, but the principle is the same. Knowledge doesn't vanish simply because the books are destroyed. No, knowledge can vanish. We can lose knowledge over time as people die out, but not from one single destructive event like this. It's got to be incredibly unlikely. And if we do lose some knowledge in something like that, it's not going to be very important knowledge. While we humanities majors lament the loss of Homer's epic cycle and the plays of Euripides, when it comes to the question of what did we lose in the destruction of the Library of Alexandria, the answer is not very much. Except for perhaps how the pyramids were built. The library's destruction is not the reason why so many texts from antiquity have been lost. The passage of time took care of that. Bonus mystery. Was the library ever real, or is it a myth? While the question of what happened to the library has been circulating for years, skeptics have been asking a whole different question of late, and that's, did the Library of Alexandria even exist, or is the whole story of the Great Library a myth? I mean, given that the dude who visited the Great Library area and he was just more enamored with their lunchroom, it seems a bit like maybe it didn't exist, or maybe it was a lot less grand or impressive or important than anyone thought. It's generally accepted that the library did exist, but this is a channel all about unsolved mysteries, and to be fair, it's not entirely an unreasonable question, so it's worth considering. Today, old Alexandria lies deep beneath modern Alexandria. Archaeologists have made great discoveries under the dusty streets and in the waters just offshore, where sphinxes, columns, ceramics, and other finds tell the story of the Ptolemies and their Alexandria. However, the library remains elusive. We know the Museon was in the royal quarter of the city, but we're not entirely sure where the Museon, and therefore the library attached to it, was built, and to date, not a single stone or scroll that once made up the Great Library have been found. Artifacts linked to some of the great philosophers who may or may not have studied the Museum have been uncovered, but while it suggests that the philosophers were in Alexandria at the time, it doesn't prove the existence of a great library. The supposed size of the collection, or rather the lack of agreement on size of the collection, adds further doubt. Seneca the Younger claims that 40,000 books were burned in Caesar's attack and apparent destruction of the library. Ammianus Marcellinus, a Roman historian writing 3 centuries later, claimed the library contained 700,000 books that were destroyed during the Alexandrian War. Skeptics claimed that there simply wasn't room in Alexandria for a building large enough to hold 700,000 scrolls, even more scrolls if the figure is 700,000 books, and they're absolutely right. This is a large collection even by modern standards. It's highly doubtful that so many different books even existed at that time. Also, imagine how long it would take for a librarian to count 70,000 scrolls, especially if new scrolls were added to the collection and copies were removed and sent to sister libraries or back to their original owners. Yeah, also, those dudes, there's no Kinko's, there's no copy machine. They're writing these out by hand. When you finally finish counting the scrolls in one section of the library, the number of scrolls in the 3 other sections that you counted over the last 2 years has changed, so you have to start over again. No librarian had the time or sanity for that. By studying the ruins of Pergamon, the rival of Alexandria, archaeologists were able to estimate the number of scrolls housed there in the available floor space and concluded that the library only held about 30,000 scrolls. The story about Mark Antony giving Cleopatra 200,000 scrolls from the Library of Pergamon was probably a wild exaggeration, if it happened at all, since Mark Antony had fallen out of favor in Rome, and the story was probably used to convince the Roman people of the excesses of Mark Antony and Cleopatra. So realistically, and based on the floor plans of Pergamon, since none exist for Alexandria, it's unlikely that the Library of Alexandria ever had more than 40 to 50,000 scrolls. Personally, I think the library's size and scope has been exaggerated over time, but the more skeptical among us feel that this only proves that the library is a myth and it never existed. The fact that there are no contemporary historians describing the library, the closest we come is Strabo mentioning a visit to the library when spending time at the Museum, is also problematic. The first mention of the library is in a letter a man named Aristeas wrote to his brother Philocrates. He claimed to be a courier for Ptolemy II and apparently witnessed a conversation between Ptolemy and Demetrius regarding the progress of collecting books for the library. Unfortunately, the letter of Aristeas has been proven a forgery. Most scholars date the letter to at least a century later than it was initially claimed to have been written, and some even doubt whether Aristeas ever existed. The letter is mostly considered Jewish propaganda intended to heighten the importance of the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. The writer was trying to magnify the size and importance of the Library of Alexandria and claimed that Ptolemy himself had insisted that a copy of the Hebrew Bible be included in this grand library, collecting all the other works of the known world, thus raising the importance of the Hebrew Bible. So, we have no solid proof to show that the Great Library of Alexandria ever existed. Everything written about the library was written after it was gone. The many accounts of Roman emperors sacking Alexandria, burning down great swaths of the city and killing off the population in some cases, don't mention a library. Of the collection of great minds often listed as studying at the Museum, we only have proof that a few of them spent any time in Alexandria, and without these great minds, Alexandria's supposed reputation as a center of learning and home to a great library is becoming less certain. Every time the story of Caesar's destruction of the library is told, the number of books he destroyed becomes bigger, and both the Christians and the Muslims were accused of burning down the great library and destroying the knowledge it held. Nothing paints your enemy as small-minded barbarians quite like the destruction of the biggest library in history. So, is that all the Library of Alexandria is? A device used throughout history to discredit your rivals? I mean, yeah. I also do think it existed. I think it was probably small, like we just said. And it's just been blown up over time to be way more important than it actually is. Perhaps the library is just a myth. However, when Julius Caesar returned to Rome after the Alexandrian War, he had plans to build a library that would rival the Alexandrian library of the Ptolemies in Egypt. He never got round to it due to a pesky assassination plot that ended his reign and plans prematurely, but Caesar August did follow up on the idea and built a huge library on Palatine Hill. So, whether the great library as we picture it existed or not, Caesar saw something in the city named after Alexander the Great himself that inspired him. Conclusion. The library as we imagine it, a grand edifice filled to the roof with books and serious scholars bent over ancient scrolls in dimly lit rooms, probably never existed. However, while the image presented in myth might be wildly exaggerated, I think the Library of Alexandria was very real, tucked into a spacious corner of the Museon, with preoccupied scholars randomly leaving scrolls lying around and a slightly hysterical librarian running on the Hellenistic world's equivalent of caffeine, trying to keep it all sorted and running smoothly. After all, the world built by Alexander the Great valued knowledge and appreciated learning, two qualities it sometimes seems our modern world has long since lost. Except for you, dear listener, or viewer if you're watching on YouTube. You're into learning, you big brain you. Make sure you review the show, leave a 5-star review, thank you so much. Other than rumours of the ancient collection being hidden away in the secret Vatican archives or buried somewhere in the desert waiting to be found, nothing remains of the library today, except perhaps its legacy. Instead of just a great collection of books, the Great Library of Alexandria has become a symbol of human knowledge and the achievement of Western thought, as well as a warning of the dark consequences when religious doctrine or war overrules logic and reason. And that's where we end today's episode. Thank you so much for being here. Like I just said, if you like the show, leave it a review on Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, or if you're on YouTube. Make sure you're subscribed, and I'll see you next time.